right, afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to share with you approximately 5 minutes of ramblings, rantings, and an invitation at the very end. So this is a bunch of stuff that I want to talk about, and some of you may be interested, and if you're not, well, too bad. So first thing is I am coming off of changing jobs, and I want to give everybody a little bit of insight on how to spot a bad fit, because this is some stuff that had I been a little bit more observant, I might have spotted some of these things a little bit sooner. So if shipping features trumps focusing on customer value, you're probably working somewhere that's not awesome. If it is more important to go fast than to go well, so if you're being told to not do tests, you're probably working somewhere that doesn't care a whole lot about quality. So unless you're doing something else to keep your quality up, you might want to look for another opportunity. Does process regularly get circumvented? If you have people going around doing shadow work, doing work that is not being tracked, so it's untraceable, you're probably working in a pretty bad environment. So if you're wondering if your fit is good or bad at a particular spot, think about some of these questions and maybe think about making a change. Now, building for gracious failure, this is a talk I gave at RubyConf this past year, and I'll be giving it again in a couple of weeks at RailsConf. And these are some of the high points from it. First, returning a 500 is bad. Don't do it if you can avoid it. Try to return something useful under all conditions, even if the data is incomplete. Accept partial data when you can. In many cases, some data is better than no data, so accept what you can and work with it. Return partial data when you can, because again, in many cases, the collaborators that you have would rather get something than nothing. And then also expect other people to fail and expect other services to fail, because we work with software and it's fallible because we're fallible. So stuff is going to break, plan for it. Microservices, don't. Okay? And here's why. You're often trading method calls for network latency. That sounds like a bad trade-off in most cases. Distributed monoliths are worse than normal ones, always. Good boundaries reveal if services can even solve your problem. If you don't need independent deployability and scalability, you probably don't need a service. You just need to make your code better. Seriously, your team is almost certainly not ready. And data models and domain models. Your data model should not be the same as your domain model. If they are, you're probably using Active Record. Active Record's ease encourages bad things. Think about ways to unwind it. Try to separate business logic from persistence. That's a great first step. Understanding your business is more important than understanding your tech. So get to know why you're building stuff, not what you're building it in, and you will have a happier time. And then, do you live in Utah Valley? Anybody? All right, great. Do you work with Ruby or enjoy it? I do. All right, let's meet. Come find me. Want to revitalize the Utah Valley meetup, and so I'm interested in hearing from everybody who lives in Utah Valley and who is interested in meeting to talk and learn about Ruby and other things. Come find me. I'll be at Piper Down, and I'll also be wandering around. I'm kind of hard to miss. So let's get this thing back on the road.
My name is David Bean, and I'm going to talk to you about something that's not necessarily Ruby related, because Alan said that I could. So I'm a part-time professor in the computer science department at the University of Utah, and I 20 years or so ago founded a company that was a natural language processing company, or an NLP company. That company raised over 10 years $130 million, and I don't think ever made a profit. So that's partly because natural language processing is something that everybody thinks is the next thing, because we all speak in human language. We need NLP in order to deal with it. And there are reasons why natural language processing is really hard. And here's a case in point. My wife is a flight attendant, and last week she was in Milan, Italy at a restaurant, and she used Google Translate to read the menu. And what she got back was something I can't actually tell you, because it had to do with artichokes involved in a particular kind of sex act. That is indicative of this kind of a problem. And Kelly also mentioned the notion of the word illegal having different meanings in different contexts. That's what I'm getting at. Most natural language processing is done using a statistical approach, where you think about language as a statistical phenomenon. People like me look down our academic noses at that and pejoratively refer to it as a bag of words approach. What is a bag of words approach? I can take a chunk of text and I'll pull all the words off of that text or out of it. I will remove, number one, all the sequence and the structure of the words. Then, in order to reduce the variation in the words so that I can see a statistically significant peak, I'm going to remove prefixes, suffixes, conjugations, and get down to the root form of the word, also called stemming. And I'm going to remove words that occur a lot so often that they seem like they don't have any distinguishing value, like conjunctions, prepositions. And what I'm left with then is a much smaller set of words, which I can then push into a classifier, and eventually I can get something out of it saying, well, that document is probably about positive sentiment and a technical issue to a certain level. Make sense? That's a statistical problem. How much have I got? All right. Here's what's wrong with that. A statistical approach can't understand that those 4 examples up there are actually not positive sentiment. Number one, we have an adjective that we've added a prefix for. Those prefixes are often thrown away in order to get at a more statistically significant set of data. The second example is a negation done through a verb phrase. And words like not are often thrown away in the stop word list. The third example is another way of negating that sentiment, which again is typically not handled. And then the third one is a big, ugly problem involving sarcasm, which is an unsolved problem. The last one I put in there, John sued Mary versus Mary sued John, is not an issue of sentiment, but those 2 sentences are critically different if you're the insurance company, right? Or the legal company. Who's suing whom makes a big difference. But if I took those same 3 words and I remove the order, I can't tell the difference. So, bag of words is an approach, which is what is typically done these days. It's cheap, it's easy, but it's a blunt instrument. What you should recognize is the best you can get out of that is sort of a direction, whether something is about a particular idea. Both John sued Mary and Mary sued John, I can tell you that's about a lawsuit, but I can't tell you who's suing whom, who's the plaintiff and who's the defendant. So, there are ways to do this which require dramatically more levels of effort, which is what my little gig did for a while. Most of the world, though, can get by with cheap, easy, and blunt. And if you want to go play with it, there's a really easy Ruby gem that allows you to do that. Right there, I can build a classifier, I can define 2 classes, and I can feed it some examples. Run it, I've got it. So, if you want to play with it, that's what you can do, but that's the reason why things like Google Translate give you lousy responses.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk about basically Crystal language and Amber specifically, again, really fast, just so that you guys know it still exists, and possibly even try it someday. And guess I need to manually resize this. Linux works, I promise. Okay, so anyway, amberframework.com is the website for the Amber framework. If you want to leave a star on GitHub without knowing anything about it, that would make me happy. We actually have pretty good guides. So if you go over here, you have like getting started, which tells you a bunch of cool things. It's pretty much as easy to get started with Amber as it was with Rails. To do as much as you can do in Rails maybe is a tiny bit harder, but making a blog is easier than 15 minutes. So To demo that, I am just going to go over to a project. The internet's really crappy, otherwise I would probably generate it myself, but it actually has to go and download stuff from GitHub, NPM, and Crystal packages, and that may just not work or take all 5 minutes. So here's a project I generated like 3 minutes ago. And if you look at it, it should be fairly familiar. Instead of app, we're using source. And we have views, models, controllers. Controllers look somewhat like controllers should look. And you have before actions. We can render lots of things. We're using slang, so it looks a lot like you're used to if you use Haml or Slim. We're using NPM to like manage JavaScript. So if you go over to config, we talked about managing secrets earlier today. This doesn't quite do all the stuff he was talking about, but instead of having multiple files like we have in Rails, we've unionized everything into a single file. So for all you have to do to create a whole new environment is create another YAML file with a different name, and that will be all the settings. You can always go over into your application CR, and you could override any of those settings with environment variables if you wanted to. For instance, like setting host equals npost, if npost, you could uncomment that or write your own code. There actually is a production environment as well that's created by default, but it's encrypted. And it uses this encryption key right here, which you should never version it. It's in your gitignore file by default. So encrypted secrets by default, AES 256 CBC. Let's actually run this. So go back here. I'll just run. Amber Watch will actually reload all the files as you go along, but it also does a bunch of node stuff that I don't care about. So I'm just going to run Crystal. Perfect. Crystal SRC, RubyHack. That will compile that and run it in the temp folder. If I go back over here, it should be running by now. So we could create, this is just a list of talks. So I'll just say Matt's and Ruby 3 is cool. And there you have it. If you look at the log, you'll see, okay, it's really fast, but you can look at that later. If you wanted to generate something else like pets, you could say Amber generate scaffold, pet, our name, string, go, Amber db, create, migrate. That will create and migrate it, theoretically. I guess it doesn't need created, it's already created, it needs to migrate. Okay, there, it's migrated, and now that actually exists. So you'll have to trust me. Please start.
Okay, I'm going to talk about maybes in Ruby. Anybody here familiar with maybes? Okay, so this is a concept from functional programming along with results and tasks. And one of my friends and colleagues, Ryan Bell, who is also a gold medalist in Taekwondo, wrote this library so we can use it in Ruby. We do a lot of functional programming on the JavaScript side, and we wanted to start using some of these concepts in Ruby as well. What's a maybe? So that's a long definition. It's on Wikipedia. You can read it at your leisure. It's a method that returns just a thing or an explicit nothing. In other words, it never returns a nil. Why? Why do we care? Well, this is the #1 exception we get from our Rails code base. Anybody else in this camp? Yeah, I hate this. More importantly, coding with intent. What does this mean? It means that sometimes nil is an oversight rather than intent. If you use a maybe from a method that might return nothing, you're saying I am intentionally returning nothing from this method. So I'm going to give you an example. This is some Ruby code. It's a person class with a nickname method. And it just says, if the profile has a nickname, I'm going to return just that nickname. And that code is bad because it should be profile.nickname, but I wrote this in a presentation this morning. Otherwise, it returns nothing. So it never returns nil. What does that mean to you as a developer? It means that if you don't handle the nil case, then this looks stupid the second you try to use it, right? Which is helpful because we're always forgetting the nil cases. Raise your hand if you have never forgot a nil case. Oh, you're a liar. Just kidding. Okay, so somewhere else in the code, we have someperson.nickname, and then the library we have will provide a default. So we say, with default, please tell us what to call you. And so what this means is that if it returns a nothing, then it just says, please tell us what to call you. Otherwise, it uses the name. The thing you get back from .nickname is not a string. It's a maybe string. And because of that, you have to handle both the case where something exists and the case where something doesn't exist. And because you handle those things, you get fewer of those exceptions that I really, really hate. This is a library called Mombi. And it's not available out there yet. We're planning to open source it. If you're interested in it, come and talk to me. I'll be around tomorrow. And we can't wait for Ruby 3.0 because types are going to make libraries like this a lot better because we'll be able to implement a maybe type in Ruby. That will be really neat. How much time do I have left? Okay, so I wanted to go real fast so I could cover the important stuff, but now I just tell you who I am. I work at a company called Exec Online. I'm a VP of engineering, and we provide executive education, post-MBA education for Fortune 1000 companies in partnership with top universities like Harvard, Yale, MIT, those sorts of places. We are looking for senior Ruby devs who like types and functional programming and maybe a little bit of React with TypeScript. So if you're one of those people, come and talk to me. We're based in New York, but our team is remote and all over the world. And very, very diverse and looking to always be diverse. And I'm done. Thank you. I have time for a question.
All right. Hey there. I'm Kurt. Nope, because I had no idea I was going to stand up and speak to you guys, so I didn't prepare anything on my laptop, so you just got to look at me. Anyhow, I wanted to discuss with you getting your first gig as a programmer. Is there anybody here who wants to be a developer, programmer, and is not working yet? Good. Thank you. Okay. I'm glad there's at least a few, because I went out there and I was having a sandwich, and I sat down next to someone, and that's what she was saying too. She's like, how do I prove myself and get my first gig when I haven't had any experience, you know? So I wanted to exhaust 5 minutes and just tell you about the experience that I just literally went through. I've changed careers several times in my life. I've been a salesperson. I've been a real estate agent. I've been a business owner for 10 years. And after my business failed, I was just ready to do something that I just wanted to do for fun, basically. And so I started looking at Ruby on Rails, learning how to program Ruby. I took a course on Code Academy in Ruby. I looked at some of the job opportunities, and I was like, wow, they pay pretty good, you know? So I thought maybe I'll throw in an application. So I started throwing in applications as soon as I had made my first couple of apps, my first couple of things, and I started having interviews. I couldn't believe they called me back. And I was talking to people that they were asking me all kinds of questions and things I'd never heard about. So I started writing them all down. And I'd bomb every single interview. And I would just tell them how awesome coding is, how much I love programming all the time. And they'd just be like, yeah, okay, but you don't know anything, basically. I asked one person, I said, what do you think? How did it go? And he's like, I think you don't even know what you don't know. And I was like, good, all right, well, at least I'm moving in the right direction. I really, you know, it took me a long time. It was like the hardest thing I ever did was to get hired as an engineer without any previous professional experience. So it was kind of like a chicken and egg thing. So a couple things you're going to need if you're trying to attempt to do this. You're going to need references, because eventually you're going to get so good at interviewing, you're actually going to get to the end, and they're going to say, give us your references. And then you're going to be like, oh, no, I don't have any. So you got to start developing some references. For me, I did it in kind of a funny way. I was a self-taught person. I just was at home, like Googling, how do I build a Rails app? How do I build, how do I do this? How do I do that? And I bumped into a few mentors along the way. One of them is here, Jason Sweat. He's not here, but he's here. Anyways, literally, I had just been kind of talking to him online and, getting some advice on writing tests and RSpec and stuff. And then that happened where it was actually 5 months ago. My employer was like, okay, we want to hire you. We just want to talk to some references. So I was like, oh no. So I went to my mentors. I went to Jason and, just sent him the name, and she sent him an email, and he called me up and he's like, we should probably talk for a few minutes if I'm going to be your reference. I was like, yeah, that's cool. So we talked, and I convinced him that he could vouch for me. And another guy was up in New York, Will Shank, good guy, Happy Fun Corp. He vouched for me too because I'd been kind of using his software for a while. But anyhow, it's worth it. Here's what I want to say. Go to the interviews, interview. Don't worry. If you don't get the job, hey, that's par for the course. I mean, literally, I went to a meetup group in Orlando. It was a Code for America group, and I saw this guy, and he's like, I really want to program. He's like, I'm always programming. And I was like, well, how many jobs have you applied for? He's like, none. I was like, okay, well, good luck with that. You're probably not going to get hired if you're not applying for jobs. And you've just got to apply. You've got to go through the interview process. And, there's really like no such thing as failure in an interview process because every time I've interviewed, I've gathered some useful bit of information, something that I didn't know, for example. I remember them, first time somebody brought up, how good are you at writing RSpec? I was like, I want to be awesome at that, but I'm not at the moment, but then I dove in and started researching it. Somebody was like, how good are you at Docker? I was like, what the heck is that? I don't know, I had to go research it, So everything, it feels to me like I've been up here for like a half hour, but anyways. I just want to say it's totally worth it because I did end up that fateful day landing my first gig, and now I'm the lead engineer at Knowledge Wave. And we have a legacy, monolithic, beautiful Rails 4.2 app, which I'm in the process of upgrading. Ruby was at 2.37 when I got on there. First thing I did was I put CI together so I wouldn't mess it up, and started making sure that we were running all of our test suite, every minute change we made. And slowly but surely, over the past 5 months, I've been able to push over 100 tickets to production. We have about 24,000 users that are paying to be on our service. So every time I push, I'm like, fingers crossed, hit the CI, make sure it goes through and doesn't crash. And it does. Fortunately, I haven't ruined it. I haven't blown up the app or brought anything down. And it's a thoroughly satisfying thing because I think probably it was so hard for me to get to that I just cherish it. Every day I'm like, I can't wait to, by the other thing, I love working remotely. So if you've ever not worked remotely and you're considering it, that's what I love to do. Because you cut out all the travel time, you just wake up in the morning and literally grab a cup of coffee and make sure the server's still running and then just get to work,